Welcome everybody to our presentation on Caribbean Regional Cooperation on Tackling the Sargassum Crisis. My name is DAPHNE EWING-CHOW, and just a very brief intro on who I am. I am a Barbadian or Bajan, and I currently live in the Cayman Islands. I am the head of content at Loop News in the Cayman Islands, and I am a sustainability contributor with Forbes.com. I previously held the post of heading up communications for a climate change and fisheries project at the Food and Agriculture Organization. And in this capacity, I did a lot of work around the sargassum issue. And so I've actually had the wonderful opportunity of working with CARLA, who is one of our panelists. And before we start, actually, I just want to go through a bit of housekeeping. We're going to be raising several panels during our discussions. One of these is going to determine where everybody's from. And the next one is going to find out what sector you're from. And the third is going to be a bit of a question around the sargassum issue. You'll also find that at the bottom of your screens, there's a folder called Q&A. This is where you can list your questions to the panelists. And we do encourage everybody to ask as many questions as possible. So we have geography up on the screen. Can our panelists and the attendees actually answer this question right now? So I will as well. And hi, Sharon from Hong Kong, saying hello to everybody. So just to give everybody an introduction of who our expert panelists are. The first person I'd like to introduce who will be going on first is CARLA Daniel. She is based in Barbados, and she is a biologist. And she's very well known in Barbados for her work with sea turtles. Just to stop right there, it's not surprisingly, 71% of the people attending currently are from the Caribbean. And the next most popular grouping is from North America. Pretty not surprising. Our next panelist is Lee Jestings, who is the founder and CEO of Enexor BioEnergy. And Enexor is also our sponsor. Thank you so much, Lee, for sponsoring this session. Our next survey has just come up, our next poll. If everyone could just fill that out really quickly, I'd appreciate that. And Enexor actually is known for taking plastic waste and organic waste and turning it into bioenergy. So Lee is going to be talking to us about that. Now we also have two panelists from two separate islands in the Caribbean who are going to be talking about their unique island contexts and what they have done on their islands to deal with the sargassum issue. The first is ABIL CASTAñEDA, who is the Chief Tourism Officer at the Ministry of Tourism and Civil Aviation in Belize. Welcome. And SYLVIE Gustave de DUFLO, who is the Vice President of the Regional Council of Guadeloupe. And welcome. So before we start, I'm just going to give a very high-level introduction on the situation. And let me just pause right there. It seems we have 27% of people from the private sector, 20% in academia, 24% from the public sector, 16% NGO, 12% other, 2% utility companies. Okay, that's interesting. Okay, so this issue, I'm trying to stay away from using the word crisis or problem, and hopefully your position on the situation can evolve throughout these discussions. The situation began in around 2011, where thick mats of seaweed of increasing density appeared on the coastlines of the region. Currently, there is an 8,850 kilometer long belt weighing 20 million metric tons, known as the Great Atlantic Sargassum Belt, extending from West Africa to the Caribbean Sea and Gulf of Mexico. And this is considered to be the new norm of the region. In the past 3 months alone, there have been more than 57,000 tons of sargassum cleaned up from the Gulf of Mexico area, the Mexico's Caribbean coast alone. And according to Jamaica's Minister of Tourism and co-chair of the Global Tourism Resilience and Crisis Management Center, the Honorable Edmund Bartlett, the unprecedented levels of sargassum seaweed that washed up on Caribbean beaches in 2018 resulted in an estimated $120 million worth of cleanup in US dollars. Given that the Caribbean region is the most tourism dependent region in the world, it is not surprising that this situation has been coined a crisis. However, there are organizations such as the Food and Agriculture Organization and many representatives of the University of the West Indies who have tried to steer away from calling it a crisis and perhaps have been more moderate, calling it a challenge. And many have referred to it as an opportunity, an economic opportunity. So hopefully between now and the end of these presentations, maybe your position on sargassum and what your perception of it will evolve. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Carla to give an overview of the background of the sargassum situation. Welcome, Carla.
Thank you very much, Daphne. I'm going to get my slide up here in 2 seconds. All right, so good evening. So I'm going to give a brief introduction on the sargassum inundation and looking at this from a Caribbean perspective and specifically a lot of examples from Barbados as well. So my interaction with sargassum is from a sea turtle conservation perspective, but I would have also done some work with the Food and Agriculture Organization with the CC for Fish project, and that would have been looking at sargassum mitigation measures as well as potential uses of sargassum. Okay, so in the Caribbean, we are all about crystal clear beaches, we're about sand and blue sea. We are, however, not unused to algae on those beaches. We're used to small amounts of algae washing in from time to time. After storms, we're used to seeing quite a few pieces on our beaches. What we were, however, not used to is this image down here at the bottom, and that is massive inundations of sargassum coming in. So from 2011, we really got our first taste of sargassum coming on to the shores of islands in the Caribbean. As Daphne would have mentioned, it caught people by surprise. Nobody was actually sure where it was coming from. Sargassum is primarily known from the Sargasso Sea in the northern Atlantic. It is not very common down our side of the world. So people actually thought it was escaping that area up north and making its way down. However, since then, we've subsequently become aware of this aggregation area just north of Brazil and over by West Africa. Now in 2015, so we had a little bit in 2011, in 2015, the sargassum came in en masse. We had this massive amount of sargassum. The picture to the bottom, that literally occurred overnight. So the day before, it was crystal clear water. The following day, we had these huge mats of sargassum. Now, sargassum does play a critical role in ecosystems. It's a nursery for fish. Those fish then attract larger fish, which attract birds. It plays important roles in migratory bird pathways as well, allowing them to get food as they're making their migration. It supports our fish stocks. They are sargassum-specific organisms like the sargassum fish and so on that are only found in sargassum that spend their entire life cycle there. So it really is this really complex ecosystem that does amazing things and supports our fisheries and other forms of life. This is when it is out at sea. However, it was another case once it started gathering and it was pushed onto the shores of islands. Now, you're going to hear me talking about the Caribbean a lot. That does not mean we're not aware that sargassum affects other places. We know that there is sargassum issues off Mexico, Florida as well, and then there are countries on the coast of West Africa that are also dealing with this problem. So we had this sargassum come in. What were the impacts? Now, the impacts were ecological, health impacts were there as well. And then there were significant impacts for fisheries and tourism as well. first, the ecological impacts. Now, this was particularly devastating. So in 2015, when we got the first mass of sargassum coming in, one of the species that were primarily affected were turtles. So we had green turtles and hawksbill turtles. Barbados has had a mass stranding in 2015. So over 40 turtles became enmeshed in a single raft of sargassum. They were held underwater and they drowned. That same raft of sargassum also killed a whale. And in addition to that, there was just a mass of other life. So there were lots of juvenile fish that died. There were lots of eels as well. There were fish that were living in the near shore that became entangled and then beached and died as a result of that. So there really was significant biological issues. Now, this is a picture of some of those turtles that were killed in that single event. We lost a pod of dolphins. Subsequent to that, these were tentatively identified as spotted dolphins, and we believe that they died as a result of the heat exposure and stress because they got entangled. And it was really heartbreaking because you could stand on the shore and see the dolphins trapped in the sargassum. It was meters thick. It really wasn't viable for anybody to go in. We tried to go in using surfboards, using other things. We just could not get to them. And within seconds, they disappeared. So 1 minute you see a dolphin floundering at the surface, unable to escape, and 2 minutes later, it's gone. And you do not see it again until the dead animal washes ashore, perhaps somewhere else. So that is the situation that we were faced with. Lots of other fish died as a result as well. But it's not just the fish. There were consequences for the ecosystems in general. So if you could imagine seagrass beds sitting under this sargassum that's right here. So the nearshore habitats were smothered. And in some cases, in narrow bays where there are not lots of waves to come in and pull the sargassum back out, this sargassum would have sat in place for months. So this is not something that came in overnight and washed back out, but it sat there for months. We had issues with nearshore coral reefs as well because the water became quite dark in color, partially due to the hydrogen sulfide that was being produced, but as well due to the decomposing sargassum that became suspended in the water column. And then you had an issue with sunlight penetrating the water and getting down to those organisms that require sunlight. You also had toxins being produced. You had low oxygen conditions because the bacteria degrading the sargassum was also using up the oxygen in the water. So it really, in this particular situation, when you're talking about nearshore ecosystems and biodiversity, it really was in fact a bit of a crisis. No, it wasn't just the nearshore ecosystems. The beach itself was impacted as well. We had in our nesting season, in the Caribbean, we have a number of turtle species nesting. In Barbados in particular, we have primarily hawksbills. And the problem was that many turtles, when you have large mats of sargassum beaching like this, they're unable to get over the sargassum, to get out of the water, to get onto the beach. The issues with incubating eggs were that nests were often covered by sargassum. And in addition to that, once the hatchlings came out, they, in some cases, were able to crawl to the water, but when there was sargassum settled in the near shore, they were not able to navigate that sargassum to get out into the open sea. So a number of hatchlings were killed. There are also concerns about the temperature of the sand because the degradation of the sargassum produced a large amount of heat. And we thought that could, one, change the sex of the eggs, but also simply reduce the hatching success because of the significant amount of heat produced. Now, fisheries. The issues with fisheries are, I think, a bit complex. So on the surface of it, you have issues with boats getting out. So if you can imagine a fisherman comes home, moors his boat, goes to bed, wakes up the next morning, his boat is now enmeshed in a massive sea of sargassum. How does he get his boat out from the middle of the sargassum out into the water so he can go and put in a day's work? Or if he's coming back and this is a landing beach, how does he get his catch off his boat and onto the beach. And those were the issues that some fishermen face. There's also the problem of navigating the sargassum, especially at night when it would be difficult to see. So there were issues with sargassum becoming wrapped around propellers and causing damage, and getting sucked into intakes and causing damage that way as well. And then having to avoid the sargassum led to higher diesel and gasoline bills for those fishermen too. Now, another impact on fisheries was a change in the availability of fish. So fishermen have reported that there's been a decline in the flying fish catch, for example, flying fish being a part of our national dish in Barbados. And it's been very scarce recently, not necessarily because the fish were declining, but because the catching methodology that worked very well prior to sargassum was not working as well now. I will say on another note, there are other fish that are now available. For example, there's the Amberjack, and that has now been added to diets in Barbados. And this is not a fish that our fishermen would have commonly encountered prior to sargassum. On another note as well, we're now seeing lots of juvenile, much smaller dolphins. And when I say dolphin, I mean the fish, mahi-mahi, in our markets. And these are now available because they're congregating around the aggregations of sargassum. So fishermen now have access to a size class of dolphin, which they would not have really had access to before. The consequences of this are currently unknown. Now, tourism. Barbados and many of the islands depend on tourism for foreign exchange. Tourists they come to our countries because they love our culture, they love our people, but what they really want to do is spend time in beautiful water, lay down on the beach and relax. Tourism was twofold. On some beaches, we had issues where there were mass amounts of sargassum coming in, so you just simply could not get into the water. But on other beaches where there was limited sargassum, there was still a problem because you had this very brown water making its way along the coastline, and it simply did not look appealing. In addition to not looking appealing, it obviously would have reduced visibility significantly, so you would not have been able to snorkel, do glass bottom boats, etc. And then as the sargassum decomposes, there's a very strong rotten egg smell. So it is not very pleasant. And that moves me on to the next impact, which was health-wise. Now, this rotten egg smell is due to hydrogen sulfide being produced, and it has caused respiratory issues with persons who live close to the sargassum. So people were having problems breathing. If they had issues with asthma, it was triggering asthma attacks. In Barbados, people actually reported the metal in their homes becoming tarnished because of the concentration of this hydrogen sulfide and other gases that were being produced. There have also been reports of contact illnesses. So people have been getting rashes on their skin. For example, I personally experienced burning when I went into some patches of sargassum. So there are a number of physical ailments that would have resulted from people attempting to clean the sargassum, as well as people just simply buying their dream beach house, not expecting something like this to happen. Now, what was the response? So you have countries that are unprepared, they're small, they have very limited financial resources, limited equipment, and they have no experience with something like this. So what do they do? So you had sargassum coming up. One of the first things, clean it, get it off the beaches. In many cases, people attempted to clean it manually, which was good for the beach in particular, but this is when you have quite a small amount of sargassum, so basically a sprinkling on the shore, and you could very easily clean it using some wheelbarrows, some buckets, pitchforks, and some really happy workers. Unfortunately, that wasn't always the case. On some beaches, we had humongous amounts of sargassum, so much so that I could probably stay on the beach and walk for 15 minutes and still not reach the end of the sargassum. That is not something that you could logically clean manually. So what happened is that people conscripted equipment from wherever they could get it. Equipment from fields, from construction sites, from quarries, just whatever was available to get down to the beach to get this sargassum moved. So we got lots of heavy machinery, which was unsuited for the delicate work that was necessary if we were going to preserve our beach habitat. And they went down, they attempted to move the sargassum, but unfortunately there were some unintended consequences. So you would expect that if there were turtle nests, for example, or seabird nests, etc. on this beach. They would have been damaged. There would also have been some damage to vegetation and so on. But at this point, I would say it was really a kind of emergency, slightly panicked response. So people were just trying to do their best with the resources that they had available. Now, this is an example of a beach in Barbados. You can see the size of that mound of sargassum that was piled up by tractors, but you could also see how much sand was mixed in with it. So on some of our beaches, we lost vast amounts of sand when these tractors were trying to clear. You could also see that the beach was very much compacted and dug up as a result. Now, granted, these are kind of the negative responses, but we also have some amazingly positive responses, and these are also continuing today. So people galvanized towards the sargassum. One of the primary industries that were concentrated on really was agriculture. And sargassum was beneficial to agriculture in almost every form. People were taking it fresh from the beach without washing it or anything, putting it straight into fields. They were using it after it was dry and adding it to soil mixes and soil amendments. They were using it and doing extractions and creating liquid fertilizers, which have supposedly had amazing results with plant growth. They were using it decomposed, like the picture just up there at the top in the hand, and adding it as the same way you would add peat moss. People were also doing things like creating animal food. There's a project in Jamaica right now looking at creating animal feed with sargassum. So that's one potential industry where sargassum can have a major impact. Not only could it create another avenue of foreign exchange for our islands as we produce these unique products, value-added products, and export them, but for countries where food security is a primary concern, anything that is locally available that can increase our food production would be very much welcome. Now, in addition to agriculture, there were other things. Now, this house at the top, I'm sure is very familiar. This is a house that was built in Mexico using sargassum blocks. There have been experimentation using making paper from sargassum as well. Many of our countries in the region are moving away from single-use plastic. And one of the ideas that was floated was using sargassum to make these biodegradable containers for food. There's also a group in Trinidad that was looking at using sargassum to make bioplastic to help replace some of our single-use petroleum-based plastic as well. So there are a lot of innovative ideas out there, not just in the region, but extra-regional as well, that would add, I would say, a bit of a bright light to this sargassum issue that we are facing. However, one of the things that is critically important is more research. And I really cannot underscore this enough. What governments in the region, if I had to say one thing that really should be done, is to support the monitoring and research. Now, one of the things that became clear is that there are potential heavy metal contaminants in sargassum. So we know that pesticides have been found. We know that arsenic has been found, etc., etc. What we don't know is in what concentrations. Is it in every raft of sargassum? Is it unique to the individual islands? Will we get heavy metal-free sargassum in 1 month and then have high concentrations the next month, in 1 year, and high concentrations the next year? And we're not sure, but in order to fully exploit or to utilize sargassum, we're going to be able, well, we need to know exactly what we can use it for. And the only way we can do that is with continuous testing. And that, of course, requires funding, but I think it is really critical. We also need to know things like the species ratio of sargassum that is coming in. There are two species. You have Sargassum fluitans and Sargassum natans, and they tend to come in all tangled up in mats. Is there more of one than the other? Perhaps if you're extracting sodium alginate, for example, there will be higher concentrations in one species than the other. So if the species ratio changes, your yield will change. So these are all things. It really is wide open and there needs to be a lot of work. That said, the University of the West Indies, as well as other universities in the region, really have been getting the ball rolling, looking at the potential uses, looking at other avenues for research as well. So people have been going out there and getting started. This picture here shows students and staff from SYRMIES at the University of the West Indies, Cave Hill, and they were doing a project looking at calculating the volume of sargassum. So people have started, but we really need financial support. So if I could leave you with one comment, perhaps, it is that with investment and innovation, the plague of sargassum sweeping the Caribbean could be transformed into a catalyst for growth, invention, and prosperity. And all you need is one good idea and, of course, a lot of support. Thank you very much.
You're actually not off the hot seat yet, Carla, because you have so many questions. I've been trying to bounce between the chat and the Q&A, and it's just kind of gone crazy. There is one thematic question that I'll get to first. Something that a lot of people seem to be asking about is the source of the sargassum. I think most of the viewers understand that the source is the coast of Brazil. Some people are asking whether this is linked to deforestation. Other people are just asking what's causing it to form off the coast of Brazil?
Okay, so what I can tell you, again, I haven't done work in this particular area, but I have read a bit and I can tell you what people are saying. So sargassum is a marine algae, and like most plants, it thrives very well off nutrients. And one of the things that has been hypothesized is that the large amounts of fertilizers and so on that are being added to land on South America, and then that fertilizer makes its way into the rivers, and then those rivers flow directly out into the sea. So there's really nutrient loading going on coming out of that water. There's also been hypotheses that say that Sahara dust coming off the coast of Africa could also be helping in some small way to feed the sargassum as well. And then there is the warm waters. We know that our ocean temperatures are rising gradually, and the warm waters also support the growth of sargassum. So one of the things that we really need information on is the growth rates of sargassum. That is where research is needed on growth rates, decomposition rates, as well, water quality testing to really take samples in the area that is growing and see what the levels of nitrogen, phosphorus, everything is over there. You can also look for heavy metals and other potential contaminants in that water. But what is known is that the sargassum is obviously being very, very well fed in that area, and it seems as every year, every couple years, the aggregation of sargassum is just getting larger and larger. And I mean, current trends being what they are, we don't foresee that the source of nutrients to that area is going to be cut off anytime soon.
Okay, let me ask you one more question and then we'll move on just in the interest of time. We have a question from Atakan Baltachi from the University of Chicago. He says he is researching the sargassum problem and is curious whether we are able to predict specific beaches that sargassum will hit, and if so, how far in advance? And are there any numbers on the scale of the issue?
Okay, so there is an amazing sargassum outlook bulletin that is created. It's a project that's being done through NASA by the University of South Florida, and it's also being facilitated by the University of the West Indies as well. And they create an outlook bulletin that tells you in advance, a couple months in advance, how much sargassum is likely to be coming to the region. I can't remember, I'm really sorry, but I can't remember, I don't want to get it wrong, the name of the other one, but there's another prediction tool online as well. But those tend to be they're using satellite data, they're using ocean modeling and so on. So it's not very fine predictions that can tell you what beach sargassum is going to come upon. What I would say at this point, it's not quite to the level where it can tell you what beach the sargassum is going to come up on. But I believe that we, as small islands with limited resources, do have our people. And I think we can use fishermen, for example, who are often offshore islands, and they could be, you know, quite a few miles, 50 miles, etc., offshore, and we can have them radio in when they see sargassum. They know a lot about the localized currents off their particular islands, and they can radio in if there's a kind of sargassum hotline or sargassum system where you have people who, perhaps beach rangers and so on, who work on the beaches, who can make notes when they see sargassum passing or coming close in. You have fishermen offshore where when they see large aggregations of sargassum that they believe are coming towards the island, perhaps certain areas of the coast, they can radio in advance warning as well. But it's, I think, a little bit like hurricanes, where we have to get prepared. It's not going anywhere. We know that some years we might have more than others, but we really need to get the management plans in place. We need to get systems in place where we have looked at our beaches. We know where our high priority beaches are, the beaches that we definitely need to clean with urgency, perhaps because of residential areas nearby, perhaps because of tourism use, etc. There might be other beaches which are remote and not used, so we can kind of leave the sargassum to degrade naturally on those beaches, feeding the shorebirds, helping to build sand dunes, fertilizing the beach, etc. But once we know exactly what we're going to do with our limited resources when that sargassum comes in, I think that's the first half of the battle. And then we utilize those persons on the ground, those persons in the near shore. For our purposes with sea turtle conservation, what we've done is that we set up a sargassum monitoring page. And we use social media extensively. So when we think, for people to tell us when sargassum has freshly come in, so we can get to those beaches, we can check for turtles or animals that are stranded, get them rescued, but also to notify us when they see sargassum offshore and so on. So, I mean, those are very low tech and very localized, but I think it's going to have to be a marriage of both the high tech satellite, fancy modeling and so on, but also what we can do on the ground on our islands as well. That's going to give the best output.
Thank you so much, Carla. And I'm sure we're going to have to come back to you a few times. So our next presentation is Lee Jestings, and he's, again, the founder and CEO of Enexor BioEnergy. And he provides a perfect example about the opportunity for sargassum and how it can be the cup half full versus the cup half empty. So I hand it over to you, Lee.
Great, thank you, Carla. That was excellent. Very impressed. My name is Lee Jestings, and like Daphne said, I'm CEO of Enexor BioEnergy, and we're hosting you here from Nashville, Tennessee. And as of last week, sargassum actually hit Tennessee, and we'll share the results of that as well. So I'm gonna give you a quick intro of our company, and then we'll talk about some testing that we've done recently with the sargassum. Let's see here. So next, our mission is really simple. Our goal is to create clean on-site bioenergy from organic waste, and we can't keep the sargassum from hitting the beaches by any means. What we can do is redirect that sargassum and turn it into energy, and avoid throwing it out in the jungle, creating CO2, and hopefully make money so that those funds can be redirected to help solve the problem. I'll give you a quick little summary of my journey with sargassum. In 2017, when I was vacationing with my family in Playa del Carmen, we first got there, and there was just a huge ball of seaweed. It was incredible. I was Googling, trying to figure out what it was. And I watched for a couple hours of the tractors and different methods to try to clean off the beach. And I remember my wife saying specifically, "Hey, we're never going to come here again." And so clearly, you know, that's the problem with tourism, is people don't want to drive or fly all the way to the Caribbean and sit by a pool. They want to enjoy the beach and the clean waters. So since then, I've seen and looked at this problem throughout Mexico, Dominican Republic, Puerto Rico, and Miami. And of course, we have a technology that we're solving other problems that are similar, and that's really what got us going towards converting the sargassum to power. So real quick, I'm gonna give you 2 slides about our technologies, just so you can get a flavor of what we're talking about. We call our system the BioCHP 75, and it's a patented technology that converts organic waste into power and thermal. It's not a gasification system. It is a proprietary system. We're not going to talk about what's in it. But some of our competitive advantages are that we can use almost any organic material, including plastics. Each unit, it generates 75 kilowatts of electricity and about 125 to 150 kilowatts of thermal. Typically in the islands, that thermal is used for hot water to replace boilers. Each unit can also offset about up to 2,000 metric tons of CO2 equivalent of CO2, depending on how it's configured. And we like to say the way we've designed this system is we can install it next to a Kroger or a Costco or Walmart in the United States, or in an isolated island in a harsh climate, or in a village in Kenya. It's a very rugged design system. One of the advantages for our technology and how it fits in with other renewables is we can provide continuous power 24/7, and we can operate actually in island mode, which is a significant advantage. And again, resilient, which is important in the islands. It can handle a hurricane or hurricane type winds, and it can be moved rather easily. Here's a quick video showing one of our systems in our manufacturing plant here in Nashville. So typically the way it's installed is we call it behind the meter. We install it on site and next to the host facility. In the islands, typically that would be hotels and hospitals, perhaps airports and industrial facilities. And one of the advantages of being installed on site is that we can offset retail power versus wholesale power. And of course, we can use the waste heat, the thermal, for other energy sources. Again, for the island hotels, we configure it to replace hot water, but we can also generate process heat, or in the future, we'll use that heat to desalinate water where water is needed. So real quick, so sargassum, last week we received our first, I think, 10,000 pounds of sargassum. I believe it's probably the most expensive seaweed in the world. I think it cost me $1,000 a ton to get it from Miami to Nashville. And you can see one of the first reactions we had with the team is it just stinks really bad. Like Carla said, it is nasty. If you haven't been around it, it really smells. And if you look closely to the right there, top right, you'll see it snagged a bottle of tequila as well, and some Mardi Gras beads and some clothes. So I hope the person that generated those is okay, but it grabbed it and it found its way all the way to Nashville. So essentially what we did over the last week is we experimented with sizing the seaweed so they can fit through our feed system. And what you'll see here is one size configuration of the seaweed. I'm gonna actually, for those that haven't seen the seaweed that comes in, if you look at the camera, it's like spongy. It comes in dry like this. And then what we've done is we've taken different methods to basically pulverize the seaweed. Let's see if I can switch. And you'll see here on the left, that was batch one, and then in the middle was the second batch, and you can see on the far right, we tried to make the material as dense, excuse me, as dense as possible so that we can move it through our auger. Right now you're seeing this is the outlet of our auger system that we're testing and measuring the seaweed. And you can see the consistency is almost like a coffee grounds. And here's a picture of the sargassum going through an auger. This is what feeds our machine. The second part of the testing, of course, is just generating power. And that's actually, quite frankly, the easy part for us. Once it's in the machine, it's easy for us to generate power. In this situation, we generated 10 kilowatts, which is about a 75 to 80% turn down of our normal system. We were also collecting the inorganics that come out of the system. Here's a picture of what's coming out of the system. And essentially what, I think Carla mentioned this as well, there's a surprising amount of metals in the ash. So we're having this tested to see what's recoverable. Maybe perhaps there's some economic value to the ash. And our next steps are real simple. As of at the end of the month in early November, we're actually going to take the remaining sargassum and we're going to power our building, probably for about 8 hours. And finally, the next step, when we go to market in April, we're shipping the first island designated units to the Dominican Republic, and they'll be installed, and they will also use sargassum and organic waste, excuse me, as fuel. And then finally, what we'll do at the same, between now and then, we'll pick what other islands we want to send our units to. So that's all I have. If anyone wants to follow up on the results and get any future data, just drop us a line and we'll include you in future emails.
It's really fascinating. Thank you, Lee. Could you tell me, in terms of getting the sargassum off the beaches, what methodology is being employed? Get it off the beaches and over to you.
The seaweed that we purchased was from a company in Miami. And I'm not sure what raking system they used. I know they're one of the few companies that has a permit to actually remove it off the beach. Okay. But we had one batch that's off, that was from the sand, and one batch was from the water.
The prospects also from the economic perspective for our islands, it's great with respect to the whole idea of a circular economy. And yes, we're putting so much into cleaning our beaches, but this is an opportunity to get money back into our system by selling it to people like you and to create energy off of it, which obviously feeds into the system as well. So that's absolutely wonderful. Our next presentation is ABIL CASTAñEDA, and he is the Chief Tourism Officer at the Ministry of Tourism and Civil Aviation in Belize, and he's going to be talking about the unique context in Belize. Thank you so much, ABIL.
Sorry, I just realized I was on mute. So sorry everybody. So in Belize, we are dealing with pretty much the same issue and the same level of challenges that CARLA had mentioned in Barbados. However, we have been tackling this issue since 2015, and in 2015, the government convened the National Committee on Sargassum because we were seeing some severe impacts to the tourism economy. We were seeing a lot of cancellations, a lot of tourist reviews were very negative, similar to what previous presenters had mentioned. But also we were seeing matters such as fish kills along our beaches. We were seeing severe beach erosions because of, using heavy machinery as well, and very, I think, unsustainable practices in cleaning up the sargassum. And we also were seeing some correlations in terms of the illnesses that we were finding along our coastal communities. We had, when there were peaks of sargassum influx, we also found that there were peaks of respiratory illnesses being recorded at our clinics, also intestinal illnesses, and as well as skin rashes, for instance. So the government really decided in 2015 to take a full and comprehensive approach in trying to manage the situation, and the Sargassum Task Force was implemented. This task force is made up of public, private, and civil sector organizations. The Ministry of Tourism is its chair. However, it has representation from the environmental sector, from the health sector, from the meteorological sector, from the hotel and the tour operating sector, of course, but also from the general private sector in Belize, and many more. I mean, it's a huge group, but it's also very diverse and very comprehensive in the different disciplines that we have around the table. Under the task force since 2015, and in 2018, really the work started in earnest after that big bloom we had in 2018 around August. The task force has put together a strategy of how the country would address sargassum, specifically within 4 areas of the country. In Belize, we're not an island, but we have many islands, and 2 of those islands are 2 of the most popular tourism destinations. One of the islands is called Amberjack Key or San Pedro, and the other island is called Key Cocker. And we also have 2 other destinations that we have prioritized, which is on mainland, it's on the coast, Placentia and Hopkins. And so the strategy that has been devised for Sargassum has specifically been in trying to address the influx and the way we manage Sargassum in those 4 destinations up to this point. So what was done is that there's a series of actions that the committee or the task force put together. And again, because it's a partnership, public-private, it was easy to get support when the recommendations have been coming. And so one of the first strategies that we looked at is naturally because, you know, we didn't know what Sargassum really was, how much of it was coming, where it was coming, when it was coming. One of the first things we did is naturally look at how can we contain it. In doing so, we did do some checks with our neighbors to the north, which is Mexico. And Mexico had some experiences in using booms and barriers, and their experience was not very good. And so we realized that you know, containment was not necessarily the main strategy that we could use to really manage the situation. And so instead of looking at physical barriers and all of that, we looked at a more soft approach. And for containment, what we did were basically 2 things. The first thing we did was for the private sector, we provided some support for duty exemptions and some incentives so that our hotels on the coast would be able to bring in equipment that they would be able to use to minimize the Sargassum influx on their beaches. We did support some booms coming in for those properties, but in terms of implementing larger booms across the entire municipality or across the entire destination, we decided not to go down that route. The second thing we did in terms of containment was that we also prioritized the beaches which we were going to attempt at addressing or cleaning up, because the coastline is fairly long along Belize, and as I think Carla had mentioned, the resources are very limited, so we have to prioritize exactly which beaches we would be able to do some sort of cleanup or relief for. And so with that, we also provided our private sector a 2% hotel tax reduction, which was geared towards allowing them to have be able to keep some revenue so that they can offset the costs that they were incurring in cleaning up their beaches. We provided municipal support to the town councils and the village councils of these destinations for them to clean up these priority beaches. And we also worked with our environmental partners to ensure that we were utilizing smart guidelines in terms of what type of machinery we use on the beaches, and more specifically, where do we dispose of this Sargassum. So all said and done, within the 4 destinations, we were able to put together a plan for relief and for cleanup for all 4 destinations using that particular containment and collection and disposal strategy. And it has been working since then. Beyond that, however, in Belize, and I think the question that was posed earlier about do we know where the Sargassum is going to land and when it is going to land, we also saw it important for us to strengthen the ability of our agencies and authorities to do some level of forecasting. So like many countries, we have been using the SARS program. The satellite feed that is provided on a daily basis is excellent, but the level of accuracy is a little bit, is not necessarily optimal because of the range where the satellites are able to cover. And so what we did is, in Belize, we do have a local airline network that's very healthy. We have flights every hour from different parts of the country across our coast. And so we have worked with the local commercial airlines, and we're actually about to embark on a training of pilots of one of the local commercial airlines for them to serve as our eyes in the air, if you may. And so they will be collecting information while they're flying. And when they land, they will provide a report back to the meteorological office, and the meteorological office will take that data and will consolidate that data with the satellite data that we have available to make a more accurate and at least give us a 3 to 5 day window that we can use. Why is that window very important? It's important from an ecological point of view. As Carla mentioned, the NGOs and environmental groups would have an idea of where the beaches, which beaches would be affected. But also for the hotel sector and the municipalities, we found that it's very difficult to get manual labor immediately. And it's more effective and more efficient if you have at least 1 or 2 days of anticipation, where you can then schedule your manual labor and you can be able to organize the logistics behind that, so that when the sargassum does land, you have all the resources in place to be able to do the cleanup that is needed. So we found that that is one way in which we could assist the municipalities in being able to, and the private sector in being able to have some level of anticipated time so that they could do their planning. Now, in addition to this, we have also done some public awareness. Like many other Caribbean destinations, a lot of the locals really did not know what sargassum was and or where it was coming from and what it does, and do we touch it, do we not touch it, that type of thing. And so we did develop a public awareness on social media locally, where we inform our local population. We also had a bit that went to hoteliers and to tour operators and tour guides. And we also had a bit that went to our visitors, just to let them know that, you know, this thing is a natural phenomenon. It's something that is still being studied, but more importantly, that we are doing something about it. And I think that where it relates to the reviews and tourists having a negative sentiment in terms of the experience they receive in destinations because of sargassum, one of the things that our visitors have said is, look, we understand that it is a natural occurrence, and what would make our experience not that bad is at least that we see that something is being done, and that we can be assured that the local authorities are doing all they can to deal with the problem. So that's positive in one sense, and so we believe that communication also is very important. Now, lastly, we have been tasked in developing a long-term management plan for sargassum. The task force has concluded that sargassum must be treated in a way almost similar to hurricanes, because of the impact it may have to the economy, maybe not to the lives in terms of loss of property and loss of lives, but in terms of the economic impact, the environmental impact, it is as severe as you can imagine for any sort of natural disaster. And because of that, we see the need for us to plan for the long-term period. And within that long-term strategy and planning process, we are seeing that the main thing, and I think Carla also may have insinuated this, the main process that we're trying to do is a paradigm shift. In Belize, we have always seen sargassum since 2015 as a problem, but it can also be looked at as an opportunity. We have had several meetings with groups that have great ideas of how to use this sargassum. In fact, just before I came into the forum, I was talking to Algas, which was coming out of St. Lucia, and I think Carla had it in her presentation also, and they're interested in partnering in Belize to be able to expand their work in developing liquid fertilizers. And so we believe that for the long-term future, this thing we call sargassum will be with us at least for the 10 to 15 years or more. So we need to find a way in which we can self-sustainably address sargassum. From a tourism point, our main goal is to have our beaches clean and our visitors and our residents having a quality of life and experience that would want them to have them return. But also we are mindful of the environmental impacts it has, we're mindful of the social impacts. And so we believe that if we can create industries, if we can create opportunities for alternative uses of sargassum, we think that that is necessarily the way to go. So I think that paradigm shift, it's important for all our countries to, and private sector and public sector to get on that bandwagon, because if we continue to look at it as a problem, we will always be, I think, challenged with the fact of just trying to clean our beaches and remove these large mats and masses that accumulate on our coasts. So that's what I wanted to share with everybody, and I do look forward to your questions.
Thank you so much, ABIL. A few things came out just before we address those and move on to Sylvie, I think this is a good time to raise a question on your opinions, and hopefully those might have shifted during these discussions. And the question is, do you see sargassum as a crisis, an opportunity, or a bit of both? And hopefully some opinions might have changed between the beginning of these presentations and now. So if you could just answer that for a second, that would be great. And I'm doing it myself. While we wait for those to come back, ABIL, Alison Rangolan asks, can the containment, disposal, and strategy document that was employed at the 4 locations be shared or accessed online?
We're currently putting that together, articulating that within the plan that I mentioned for long-term management. But we would be happy to share if she sends me an email or contacts me or anybody. I have my contact information on the slides being shared on the desktop. So we would be more than happy to provide an account of what we're doing and how we're doing it, so that we can provide that right off the bat and immediately. However, an official document, as I say, and that is the exact document that we're putting together for the long term.
Okay, great. And so the results of the poll are overwhelmingly moderate, which is great. I think it's great to see that the minority of respondents see sargassum as an outright crisis, and there's more of a balance between crisis and opportunity. I think the example from Lee is just a perfect demonstration of how sargassum can really be used to provide something positive and a positive economic builder for our region. Just one last question, and then we'll move on to Sylvie. This one actually comes from our good friend James. Belize is part of the world's 2nd biggest reef. How has the sargassum issue, how has it impacted reef life?
Well, a lot of the studies are still being done. However, there's something that started to show itself in July of this year in our reefs. And it's actually a whitening disease that I understand is also being seen in Florida, and in Mexico it's also very rampant. But there is some correlation, whether it's scientific or just in terms of the incidence of peaks between sargassum and this. But there seems to be some correlation between that whitening disease and the influx of sargassum within our region. In terms of marine life, thankfully the sargassum is not currently being accumulated along the reef. It's along the coast that it gets past the reef. But what we have seen is similar to Barbados. We have seen some severe fish kills in the northern part of our country. And these are smaller juvenile fishes that are being impacted. And so there is an obvious impact in terms of the ecological challenges that sargassum is creating, not only in front of Belize, but for the entire Mesoamerican reef. But I do want to reiterate something that the previous presenter, that CARLA had mentioned, in that research is something that is absolutely necessary for us to be able to tackle this situation. The research that is being done is great, but is also very severely limited. And we do need more of a regional approach in being able to understand exactly what is going to be the true impacts of sargassum and other algae blooms, because it's not the only algae bloom that we're seeing, and its impacts on our reef system.
Great, thank you so much. Now we're going to move on to Sylvie GUSTAVE de DUFLO. Again, she's the Vice President of the Regional Council of Guadeloupe, and she'll be talking about the unique context of Guadeloupe. Thank you, Sylvie.
We are talking about massive stranding of sargassum from local to global management from the Regional Council of Guadeloupe. Oh, take time, sorry. Okay, that's fine. So the Regional Council of Guadeloupe, it's a French West Indies collectivity. So we have to face the invasion of massive sargassum blooming. So we have to realize to make 4 strategies to manage this crisis. The first is supporting local community. The second, design of a technical collecting device. Go to the international cooperation, and for the end, call for research, development, innovation proposal. The regional council have to support local communities with the government, the French government. So we designed several tools: financial support to collect sargassum on the shore, 20% of the cost, up to 360 mil euro for collect and equipment. Integration of sargassum issue in township soft-ground action plan. Financial support to hire person per month dedicated to follow up the Guadeloupe mitigation action plan to tackle sargassum implementation, and support French government action plan to tackle sargassum impact. The aims: reduce human health, economic and environmental impact of sargassum stranding on the coast. And we have many partners: French government, township, and community of township. We reach many results: equipment of all impacted township. The cost is about 2.6 million euros. To face the invasion sargassum, we have to innovate and to create. For this reason, through a public procurement, we invite companies to design an innovation device to collect sargassum from the sea near coast. The aims: improve regional council capacity to reduce sargassum stranding impacts, and we expect to propose an easy to deploy an efficient and operational technical solution to collect sargassum with less environmental impact. The calendar of implementation is 2020, and the estimated global cost for 3 years is about 10 million euros for collect and equipment. Act locally, think globally. For this reason, we try to have international cooperation. And the next move for us was to realize an international conference on sargassum. In few days, from October 23rd to 26th, gathering scientists, stakeholders, and government involved in sargassum issue, and show up already existed a technical solution. The aim: design of a joint strategy to efficiently mitigate sargassum stranding and mobilize all stakeholders and funders to ease its implementation. The French government is a very strong partner in this international conference, but also Mexico, Dominican Republic, OECS, ACS, French Caribbean Overseas Local Government. It's about 16 nationalities will be there. We expect improve and share knowledge on sargassum through an online common information system. We expect also improved competence and capacity building and collection, storage and valorization of sargassum. And we are very ready to develop a surveillance and early warning system of sargassum stranding at the scale of the Great Caribbean. Set up a network of air quality surveillance system and follow-up of human health impact. About our air quality network and health program, we're going to set up a Caribbean network of air quality measurement system related to sulfur, hydrogen, and ammoniac emission due to sargassum degradation. This is very toxic gases for the human health. Follow up the impact on human health of gases emission. Our aim is to collect data on sargassum degradation gases emission and have a better understanding of the degradation process to improve health policy linked to sargassum stranding. Our partner, French government, Mexico, Dominican Republic, OECS, ACS, and French overseas local government. We expect to set up this program in 2020. We would like also to set up a surveillance and early warning system, a Caribbean forecasting tool, and operational and pragmatic bulletin on predicting sargassum stranding. The aim is to have a fine-tuned surveillance and early warning system on sargassum stranding to improve sargassum coping strategy implementation. You can see the partners and the calendar for the implementation. But for the regional council, we have to very improve the knowledge. And for this reason, we initiate an international call for research, development, innovation proposal. The call for collaborative proposal launched on February, last February, and closed on June. The objective, the aim of the call was to improve knowledge of sargassum ecologies as a basis for environmental decision making, foster the design of both short and long-term management strategies, and provide innovative, cost-effective solutions capable of mitigating the impact of sargassum stranding. And we have found a large amount of partners. National agency, French National Agency Research, Brazilian agency research like FAPEPS and FACEPS, HADEM, Regional Council of Guadeloupe, Martinique, and French Guiana. The calendar selected projects have been already done, and the selected project will be presented during the conference project. And the project should start by January 2020 for 3 years duration. And the cost was about 9 million euros. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Sylvie. Something that comes out for me from both your presentation and that of ABIL is this need to integrate all stakeholders in a national response to sargassum. I know, ABIL, you talked about working with the hotel sector and providing them with some sort of alleviation from a financial perspective so that they could tackle the issue on their own coasts that affect their own hotels. And Sylvie, you talk about these collaborative measures such as conferences. How successful have these public-private partnerships been? And this is also a question that Lee could respond to. I see he's not there, but even CARLA, you as well, because I know you work with the university. And how organized has the response been regionally in terms of the different countries within the region working together? And I guess this is something that everyone can answer. So maybe if you put up your hand, whoever puts their hand up first, I'll give them the floor.
Yes, okay. To have a response, we have international conference for scientists, I mean engineers and politics. And we decide to have a conference very neutral, and we have talking about scientific question, solution, innovation, and how politics can manage at the great large Caribbean basin. But we have also side events where the private enterprise can expose their procedures. And in the name of the international international shows is Sarg Expo. In this Sarg Expo, it's about 16 nationalities, 16 different nationalities who applied to expose their procedures, their innovation in collect, storage, valorization, teledetection, and also air quality surveillance for the population. In the Sarg Expo, it's it's free for the public, and all the people will be in the conference, and people and politics who may find solution, technical solution to their problem for collect, storage, and so on. So for the Conference International, the Conference International is the first step to realize a large cooperation with the Caribbean island and the organization of the Caribbean island. And the international conference, it's just the first move. And we're going to have 3 years cooperation with on information, a platform for share information, how all kind of information, I mean for public, for scientists, for politics, and so on. A second, we would like also to have air quality surveillance, because in many countries, and for the French collectivities, the health human is very important. And today we have very competitive and efficient tool to register the gas emanation, hydrogen, sulfur, and ammoniac. And they are very toxic for population. For this reason, we decide to have a very strict political with the township about the exposure of the population to these toxic gases. And we today in France, we have tools to detect hydrogen, sulfur, and ammoniac level, and we should share this tool with Caribbean island. And the second one, we have to improve the teledetection and the anticipation of invasion of Sargassum, our coast. It's a very important, because we working very hard with a private enterprise to devise a new machine, a new engine to collect. We'll be able to collect the Sargassum nap, not on our coast, but in the sea, very near the coast. And we are working also hard to develop the valorization of the sargassum.
Oh, wow. That's really interesting. You raised a few times with regards to the toxicity of the sargassum, and that actually takes me to, there's so many questions with regards to this, and maybe this is a good question for Carla. With regards to the toxicity of the sargassum, you also talked about the high levels of heavy metals. How does this impact its use in products such as fertilizers?
Excuse me, I do not understand. Can you repeat, please?
Sure. I was directing it to Carla because she was the biologist, but you raised a few times the toxicity of the sargassum.
Mm-hmm.
And I was asking, it's been raised quite a few times in the Q&A, how does the toxicity of the sargassum affect its potential use in products such as fertilizer? Carla?
Oh, okay, sorry. I think my internet is being a little wonky at the moment. Okay, so potential toxicity, it all depends on what exactly those toxins are that are present and what concentrations they're in. And then it depends on how you're using. So for example, I had spoken to a chemist, and this is all anecdotal, so please, this is not hard facts or necessarily research, but I'm not a chemist myself. I did speak to a chemist, and he had said where heavy metals are concerned, for example, that if you were to use a steam extraction with the sargassum biomass to create something like a fertilizer product, the heavy metals would stay in the biomass itself. So when you extract your liquid, which would contain all of your nitrogen, etc., it should not contain any heavy metals. And the good thing is that we can now send products for testing. So if you did something like that, you just take a sample of your product and you send it for an elaborate testing and see exactly what it contains. Now, this is not the same when you're applying sargassum itself as an organic fertilizer directly to your garden or to your crops. So you really want to know. So for example, let's say you have an organic farm and you think that sargassum would make a great alternative fertilizer to some of the commercially available fertilizers. So you would just work it in. That would not be the case if it contained pesticides or if it was coming with these contaminants in it already. And there are some very strict guidelines that govern import in a lot of international countries of products. So there's some things where certain levels might match your local acceptances for these contaminants, but it may not match up with the markets that you're attempting to send your products to. So there really are a lot of concerns. It also depends, I think, what you're planting in the field. So some crops may take up these heavy metals, others might not. So it is better always to be equipped with knowledge. And at this point, I don't think there is enough information from all of the islands. So we really need, if we are going to go forward with these products, there are some, we need to look at the methods we're using to create these fertilizers. So if there are heavy metals present, you may have to do a similar extraction to that steam extraction that leaves them in the biomass. So you don't have those contaminants in your product. It may not be appropriate to use it for a soil mix or to apply directly to the soil. But the only way you can know exactly what methodology is best is if you know exactly what is in the sargassum and at what concentrations, and also in what forms as well, because you get different forms of arsenic and so on. So that is another thing that is important too. So it all comes back to science and to testing and to collecting data and then using that information to draw your conclusions and to create your plan.
Really interesting. My next question comes from Dora Moscoso from IADB Lab, and this is for anybody who cares to answer. Could the private sector, hotels in brackets, who are directly affected, play a role in supporting the early warning system? I know, ABIL, you talk a lot about integrating the hotel sector. from a cleanup perspective, but how about the early warning system? Does anyone care to respond to that?
Well, I wouldn't venture to want to speak for the hotel sector, but I do know in Mexico, and we have been working with Dora on trying to put together a forecasting system for the Yucatan Peninsula, which includes Belize and Mexico. But I do know that in Mexico, for instance, the hotel sector has actually been very active in assisting, not necessarily in forecasting, but at least in monitoring of the impacts of sargassum on their beaches. So I do know of some NGO and agencies that have put up, for instance, video cameras on the beaches. And so they are able to use that to then eventually develop a daily clean beach forecast for the Riviera Maya in Mexico. So they would know which beaches are clean, which beaches the tourists can go to, and that sort of thing. So I know that the hotel sector has been very active in that realm of things. In Belize, where it relates to forecasting, again, because of the geography of Belize and all of that, it's a little bit difficult for the hotel sector to get involved, at least up to the point of the discussions we have had with them. However, they have mentioned, as I said before, the ability to forecast and give at least a 2 to 3 day window would be absolutely monumental to them in being able to have more efficient mobilization of resources on their side of things. So it's necessarily that type of partnership in being able to, yes, have a good forecasting system, but on the other realm of things, having a system that also is efficient in cleaning up the beaches. I think that's where the partnership with the hotel sector would be fairly possible. But of course, we're always open to new ideas, and maybe some destination is doing something else different that we can learn from. And I must say, we must congratulate the French government that has really taken the lead in trying to, bring everybody together to discuss upon this issue that is absolutely near and dear to all of us. Also, the Mexican government has been very active in doing the same. So I do think we are seeing much more activity and much more, I would say, leadership where it relates to the regional approach to dealing with sargassum. So that's a positive that we must, is important to take in mind.
Yeah, that's absolutely wonderful. This next question is for Lee, and it comes from Sharon Yao. I hope I pronounced your name correctly. She asks, what method does Enexor use to minimize the carbon emission during bioprocessing?
Well, I'm not exactly sure what stage it is, but as far as going into the system, you want to move it quickly so it doesn't turn into methane, doesn't start decomposing. Once it's in the system, the emissions will be pure CO2 and water vapor coming out of the exhaust or emissions.
Okay. Final question. Actually, before I move on to the final question, I do want to ask you one more thing. What have your discussions with regional governments been like? Have they been very embracing of your solution?
Yes, I mean, we've had some really good discussions, primarily focusing on the private sector, the hotel groups. Very, very receptive in the Dominican Republic. There's some of the people there are the leading, I think that they have the leading methods for trying to remediate the sargassum from hitting the shores. We're also dealing with a very forward-thinking group in Quintana Roo area.
It's wonderful. With regards to developing countries, obviously there are limited resources, and this is a question for everyone, and maybe everyone can provide a sort of a 1 or 2 minute response. What are the maybe top 2 priorities on a national level? What should they be with regards to sargassum, given the fact that we are dealing with limited financial resources? What does everybody think with regards to that? And Lee, since you have the floor, you might as well begin. Hello?
Well, maybe I can start.
Okay.
I think the number one priority is, at least from our point, our government has been doing its best in trying to subsidize the relief efforts within the destinations, but that's unsustainable. And I think one of the number one priorities is, one, research sargassum and understand exactly the composition of it. The questions about toxicity and all of that is very important. But secondly, in really putting some resources into developing industry and developing alternative uses. I think that's where we as governments, and I can speak for the public sector, where we as government need to be. And so that eventually the cleanup of our beaches, which from a tourism point is our main priority, would not only be an isolated activity, would actually be part of a value chain that can self-sustain itself, and that local governments and local organizations would be able to take the lead and charge. That really is in my mind the only way we can look forward to a sustainable long-term way of managing sargassum.
Okay. Sylvie, what would you say would be the top priorities with regards to sargassum management?
The health, the human health, of course, for the Regional Council of Guadeloupe and for the French government. And because of the toxicity, we have no, we have no data about the long exposure to the gas toxicity for the population. So we have to be very careful about these toxic emanation gases. And the second priority, it's of course the economic priority for tourism, for fisheries, and so on. So and also we have a third priorities is the environmental, because of the invasion of sargassum. It just attacked the ecosystem on the beach, and we saw the CARLA's photographies for the animals, for the ecosystem, and so we have to improve our knowledge about this crisis of sargassum.
Carla? Any last thoughts? Maybe what I'll put out there, because I feel like from a national level, maybe the two people who needed to answer that have answered that. So maybe any last thoughts, Carla and Lee, that you can leave us with? Carla, you go first, and then Lee.
Ooh, okay. So what I would say is that we cannot consider, we had a poll earlier that talked about whether we saw sargassum as a crisis, an opportunity, or a bit of both. But I would like to be so bold as to state that as small islands in this region, we have no choice but to consider sargassum an opportunity. We simply, as ABIL mentioned, we cannot sustain throwing money into a black hole. We cannot sustain a linear sargassum trajectory where we are consistently putting inputs in, where we're losing funds from tourism, we're losing funds from fisheries, etc. And then we're spending money as well in trying to mitigate and in trying to clean. It is not sustainable, and we just cannot do it. So really, if we are going to be able to survive this, and it is something that seems long-term at this point, we really need to see it as an opportunity. If one thing does not work, then we need to put some resources in place, as was mentioned, to get the innovation going, to get entrepreneurs going, to try to create that circular system that will allow sargassum really to pay for itself. And if we're very fortunate and we can come up with some remarkable idea, Lee already has one, if we can get a few more going, then we can get sargassum not only paying for itself, but inputting into the general GDP of our countries as well. So I think, again, it was mentioned already, we need a paradigm shift. We've learned a lot from 2011 when we were panicking to now perhaps where we have learned that we need to minimize environmental impacts through cleaning, that we can't, just jump in with both feet. We need to do data collection. The science is extremely important, but I think we need to speak to our governments, need to shift their position speak to their citizens and get everybody on the same page where Sargassum is concerned, where we understand that we simply do not have a choice. Sargassum has us boxed in on our islands. We are surrounded right now, and we are going to have to innovate our way out of this. And it has to be an opportunity. We cannot allow it to become a crisis.
This is actually perfect segue into Lihu. Thank you again for, as Enexor, for being our sponsors. This has been a really amazing session, and you, of course, epitomize the idea of innovation. So can you leave us with your final thoughts as well, Lee?
Well, thank you. I think that the focus has to be to protect tourism. I think it's a real problem in my perspective here from the United States, people not wanting to go to the Caribbean. So I'm a big proponent of the innovators that are diverting the sargassum from the big tourist beaches, and then controlling where you can remove the sargassum, and then again using it for alternative purposes, including energy or fertilizer. I think that's where I'm curious to see who makes those innovations and keeps it off the beach.
Perfect. Thank you all so much for this just absolutely insightful session. There have been so many questions, and I'm so sorry for the questions that I never got to. I don't know how it works, whether James will be able to read all of these afterwards, but there's just so many fascinating questions and comments. Thank you, everybody who attended. Thank you to my panelists, and everybody have a good evening.
Have a good evening. Thank you.
Thank you.